Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Weber. This is your AMAC podcast, Better for America. Joining us once again is the great John Solomon. He is an award-winning journalist and founder of Just the News and host of No Noise on Real America's Voice. John Solomon, welcome to Better for America, and thanks for joining us here today.
Yeah, great to be with you, Rebecca.
You know, John, since you were last on, Trump has been indicted 2 more times. Once in D.C. for his alleged role on January 6th, and again in Georgia over his efforts to expose election fraud during the 2020 election in the state of Georgia. So many of our members are saying that these indictments reek of political persecution. Regarding the Georgia indictment, John, they're trying to prove that Trump knowingly lied about thinking that the election may have been stolen or that there was some election fraud happening. Isn't this going to be hard to prove? And will Trump's team, in your view, do you think that they might expose and show examples of some election voter fraud in the state of Georgia?
Well, absolutely. First off, there is a piece of evidence that Jack Smith got before he brought his charges in Washington on January 6th, and Fani Willis brought her charges in Georgia. That shows there was an investigative team. It was headed by former NYPD Commissioner Bernie Kerik. And on the night of January 5th, they still believe they had numerous open examples of potential fraud and irregularities in the battleground states, including Georgia, that had not yet been investigated. And their strategy was to ask legislatures and law enforcement agencies in there. The fact that Trump's own investigative team has contemporaneous documents showing that they had open and serious allegations that they were looking at, I think it's going to become a very important piece of evidence as these 2 trials come forward. Now, in addition, there are some very stunning pieces of fraud and irregularities that have come forward since the 2020 election. In fact, they came well after January 6th. Let's take a couple big ones that are the Justice Department's own records. In November of 2021, a year after the 2020 election, the U.S. Justice Department, through its U.S. Attorney's Office in New York, charged 2 Iranian hackers alleging that they were working on behalf of the Iranian government, that they hacked into a state database, downloaded as many as 100,000 voter identities, and used those in a malign influence campaign in the election. So there was a foreign interference that involved specific hacking into a database, something very different than what we were told in the days after the November 2020 election. Another good example, not once, but twice since the 2020 election, quite a bit after the election, the Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled that the 2 main tactics that liberals used to whip up their vote in Wisconsin, one of those is infirmed voting, which gave an exemption, unlawful it turned out, to people who were voting from home, that they didn't have to show voter ID. That was ruled unconstitutional and illegal. In addition, drop boxes, which were used, those also were ruled as outside the law and not in creation. So there are real examples that Donald Trump's going to be able to bring to play where either there have been findings of irregularities, illegalities, or intrusions in the election, or court rulings to the such. And I think that those are going to play large if Trump does get the trial in either of those cases.
Yeah, it really is amazing when you look back and you see the Democrats have a long history of claiming election fraud. Look at Hillary Clinton in 2016 when she said that the election was stolen from her by the Russians. And we know how that story played out. This is all just I'm glad to see that Trump has been standing strong. AMAC members appreciate that he has been just taking it and saying, you know, I think perhaps the left is underestimating the hand that they're playing. We see that Trump is gaining more and more support with each indictment.
Yeah, that definitely. His poll numbers have gone up about 12 points since the first indictment began. So he's only consolidating his support in the midst of these indictments. I think there's another thing. You looked at how quickly that mugshot from Georgia went viral and how it sort of played to Trump's advantage and Democrats' disadvantage. There are lots of warning signs for the four prosecutions that are ongoing, that the American public do not like this approach. They don't believe that the leader in power should be able to jail or prosecute the person who's likely to run against them in the next election. Feels sort of banana republic-like. And I think they're voting with their support for Trump right now. And I suspect that that's going to continue all the way through Election Day.
Yeah. Now, John, the D.C. indictment is really unique because he was already acquitted by the Senate for his role on January 6th. So AMAC members are curious, and they're asking if this indictment violates the Fifth Amendment regarding double jeopardy, or is there a difference, here between a criminal, investigation versus something political in the Senate?
I think that there are going to be multiple constitutional arguments against the D.C. argument. One is double jeopardy related to the trial and acquittal of a president. That's never before been tested in the Supreme Court related to impeachment. My guess is that it will. The second is a lot of the activities that Donald Trump is charged with, both in Georgia and in the Washington, D.C. one, involve the first speech, political speech, First Amendment, free speech. And I suspect, as Alan Dershowitz, by the way, a supporter of Joe Biden, said, Donald Trump was allowed to say and do the things he did that day because it was protected political speech. And then I think there are going to be some Fourth Amendment issues related to the efforts to pierce attorney-client privilege, executive privilege, failure to follow due process that also I think will come up in future challenges. So some of those constitutional amendments, 1, 4, and 5 particularly, likely to see some time before in the court system. I suspect some of these will get all the way to the Supreme Court before there's a trial.
Very interesting. And we know about the 18 others who have been indicted, and they, in my view, should be constitutionally protected. Can you imagine? Here you are, in effect, doing what you think is your job. You're doing it within the guidelines of the U.S. Constitution, and now you're being indicted. This is taking down families, impacting careers, costing millions of dollars. It just seems like it's all so very wrong. But I love to talk about the good news. And here's some good news. We recently saw two major media events last week. One of them was on Fox News with the U.S. presidential primary debate. I think over 12 million viewers tuned in there. And then we saw on X, formerly known as Twitter, that there were over 260 million views of that Tucker Carlson interview with Donald J. Trump. And what rings through my head, John, here is that the legacy press, I think they're terrified. I think that what we're seeing in these corporate newsrooms is conversation like, geez, we didn't know so many people were going to get at this information and news. Do you see the landscape, the media landscape in America changing?
They should be terrified, and I think some are now, because not only are you seeing a strong embrace of the Republican candidates through those two events, the Tucker Carlson, Donald Trump interview at Twitter, now known as X, and the Fox News debate, you're also seeing a repudiation of news media's imposed narratives, the narratives they imposed on the American people in 2020, now completely unraveling. The Joe Biden scandal and the allegations by Victor Shokin, the prosecutor, clearly were legitimate in 2019 when I wrote about them at The Hill, and yet they were canceled all through 2019, 2020, 2021. Same thing about vaccine injuries, same thing about the laptop being disinformation when it wasn't. There are more than a dozen significant narratives that the mainstream legacy press, legacy media imposed on the American people that have turned out to be false. And there's been some very dramatic moments where famous legacy media anchors, people like Chuck Todd and some of the CNN anchors have, Jake Tapper among them, have actually had to reverse themselves and say, hey, Donald Trump was right, and we and Joe Biden were wrong. The Washington Post fact checkers had to change some of the fact checks that they so arrogantly imposed across the American people, when in fact the facts clearly challenged those fact checks, and they're now being corrected. The legacy media's reputation is in tatters with much of the American public, and I think that is causing a greater sense of panic.
Yeah, it sure seems that it is. I'm curious, John, what was your take on the presidential primary debate? We had a lot of great people that are, freedom-loving Americans. What was who do you think was the clear winner, if there was one at all?
Yeah, listen, I think the three strongest performers, when you take a look at how much time they were able to command and then the post-polling reaction, probably are Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy, and Ron DeSantis. Probably in that order in terms of just points scored. Nikki Haley, I think, was able to straddle that line of MAGA and the traditional party quite well. Ron DeSantis, I think, showed himself as a MAGA guy, a younger MAGA version of Donald Trump. And Vivek Ramaswamy, I think, appealed particularly to the libertarian streak of the Republican Party, which is very active among young voters, anti-war voters, get government off our back voters. I think he did well there. I think those were the three strongest contenders. Mike Pence probably in number 4 because he was able to use his perch as former vice president to get a lot of airtime. And if you look at the polling numbers, they seem to track along those lines. I think the overarching message is that there are beneath Donald Trump, a group of Republicans that are quite capable and one day quite capable of succeeding him and running the party. Any one of those, I think, could have succeeded very well in leading the party. But right now, that debate does not appear to have changed the dynamic of Donald Trump being really miles ahead, really in danger of running away with the primary. He still remains 40 to 50 points ahead of his nearest competitor. So while several people, I think, showed their ability to be a future leader in the Republican Party at the presidential level, it did not change the overall dynamic of Donald Trump being in a commanding lead in the Republican primary just 4 months before the start.
Yeah, and I think that just those views on that Tucker interview alone speaks volumes.
Yeah.
I think Tucker's got 9 million followers. So to see how many people, 260 million tuning in, clearly that goes to prove that Donald Trump is certainly running the race and in the front lines here. So thank you so much. John Solomon, what a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
There's a concerted effort to intimidate and censor conservative thinkers. The very freedoms secured by our Constitution are being threatened by the most liberal progressives America has ever seen. They're trying to indoctrinate and corrupt our children in schools. They've defied the authority of the Supreme Court. They've weakened our economy with lockdowns and mandates. They've failed to keep our borders secure. They've weakened America's position on the global stage. It seems like everything they do is to the detriment of our great nation. But there are plenty of patriots with the courage to stand up to the left, and there's an easy way for you to stand with them. Join AMAC. AMAC is the conservative membership organization that's helping to make America great again. AMAC is a voice for conservatives that cannot be ignored. Stand with over 2 million America-loving patriots by joining AMAC today.